What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the long-form podcasty type version of this video, or if you're listening on Spotify, I'm sorry, I say video all the time and you're listening and not watching, but I see you too and I'm glad you're here. A couple of hours ago, I put a poll out on Instagram asking folks who are in private practice with a full caseload, are you happy in your business? I was curious to see how many of us are not so happy with our practices. And at least according to my very specific, biased group of people following who also respond to things like this, 79% said, I'm happy with my full practice, and 21% said, nope, I'm still unhappy, even with my full caseload in private practice. So even though it sounds like the majority of people who are in private practice with a full caseload are quite happy with their job, I think it is really worthwhile to take a look at those 1 in 5 people or so who have that full caseload in private practice but are still not happy. I mean, to think that you went through that whole process of thinking through, is private practice right for me? Is it worth it to kind of jump into these risky choices and go ahead and do all of those things, put in the work, get that full practice, and you're still feeling like maybe it's not worth it, or I'm just not happy with it. And I've definitely heard this story in a lot of contexts, obviously through private practice skills, but also friends and colleagues who are in private practice, their caseload's full, and they're just not, they're not feeling it, it's not working. So in this video, I thought it might be helpful to put together some of the common reasons why I've seen that folks tend to still feel unhappy even with a full caseload in private practice, and offer some potential ways that you could address that in case you're in this boat, or to help avoid entering into that boat if it's potentially in your future. Now, this is purely anecdotal from just observing my own circles, but it seems like one of the most common reasons why people are unhappy with their full private practice is that they're working too much. And the sad irony that this happens, where for a lot of people at least, one of the reasons why you're trying to get into private practice is often because you feel like you don't have too much work-life balance in whatever work setting you were working in before. So you're trying to get out of it, and then you find yourself in the situation yet again where you're working more than you wanted to. So I think it's reasonable to wonder and ask, why is it that so many folks wind up still working too much once they end up in private practice? And I think there might be a few different reasons. One, there can be this kind of narrative or cultural value that we're supposed to see a certain amount of clients in order to, be considered full or to be successful. And so I think for a lot of folks, it's possible that even though it might not be necessary for you to be seeing so many clients and working so much, you do anyway because that's what your friends are doing, that's what you think you're supposed to do, that's what you did at your agency before, and so naturally you just end up seeing more clients than is reasonable for your work-life balance. Now, I'll go on a little tangent on this for a second for those of you listening to the podcast. This is just kind of speaking in averages and isn't a representation of everyone, but from what I've seen, my perspective, it does look like for the average therapist, something like 15 to 20 clients a week is a very sustainable sweet spot. So in my mind, if you're seeing 15 to 20 clients a week, you're working full time. Now, it's so easy to take on a perspective that that's not full time, because what happens to the other, 20 to 25 hours in a week if you're just seeing therapy clients in those hours? First of all, if you've been doing this for any amount of time, you know that you're spending other hours doing other things, not just seeing therapy clients. There's a lot of admin time, there's marketing, there's taking care of your billing. There's a lot of stuff to do. So it might actually still add up to close to 40 hours a week. But even if it doesn't, there's an emotional limit because the therapy work is so inherently emotionally taxing. So we have to think about full time, not in how many hours of my productive work week am I filling with clients, and more of how much is a reasonable cap point for me to still be able to sustain this week in and week out. For a lot of us, 15 to 20 clients a week is that number. And for some folks, it's smaller. And for some folks, it's much bigger. Just like any bell curve, it's probably like that, where there are some people who can see 30 clients a week and totally sustain it. And there are some folks who might say, I need to cap at 10 or 8, and that's also totally fine. Personally, I'm running 2 businesses. Private Practice Skills is now my main source of income, and my therapy practice is my side hustle. But even if I was just doing private practice right now full time, I imagine I'd probably cap off at 12. I think that's where my sweet spot is in this season of life where I have 2 little kids and I'm a highly sensitive person and all of that. So the solution here is to find your sweet spot, like how much work is reasonable for you to be able to sustain over time. Try to throw out your expectations of, this is how many clients my friends are seeing, or how much I used to see at my old job, or whatever other kind of set expectations you have, and just say, if I could be selfish for a second and see however many or few clients as I wanted, money aside, all of that, how many clients a week would I want to see in a perfect world? And just at least know what that number is, even if you end up adjusting it for other reasons, and then say, okay, that's where my sweet spot is. And if I choose to adjust it, it may be based on other values, but I don't need to have my baseline starting point be something other than my natural sweet spot, if that makes sense. Now, a second common reason I see for why people are still unhappy, even with their full private practice, is they're getting paid too little. Or again, they're having to see too many clients at the rate that they're earning in order to earn the income that they want. I mean, the oversimplified, simple solution to this is to just find a way to earn more per therapy hour than you're currently earning. However, I know that this feels more complicated for a lot of folks than it sounds on paper. I feel like I've talked about this a lot in videos in the past, but I think it's also been a while since I've talked about it, so I'll name this again here. Personally, before private practice skills became, my holy grail income source, I personally raised my rate every single year, no matter what, by $5 to $10 per session. Now, I think for a lot of folks, we feel really uncomfortable doing that because it feels like, therapy is already really expensive for folks coming to see us, and now we're just making it more expensive. Are we going to lose clients if we raise our rate, et cetera, et cetera? But if all we account for is inflation, not even accounting for giving yourself a raise, just inflation, you have to raise your rate a reasonable frequency in order to keep up with inflation. In other words, if you don't raise your rate every single year, you're giving yourself a pay cut. So to really paint the picture and drive this point home, I'll share a personal example because a few years back, I made a decision to stop raising my therapy rate at the yearly frequency that I had been because private practice skills became my primary source of income. So I made a choice to say, you know what, I can just hold my therapy rate at the same rate for now. Effectively, I decided I was comfortable taking a pay cut in my therapy practice because I was getting a pay raise in my other business. So to just put some numbers to it, back in January 2020, my rate was $185 per 50-minute session, and I've kept it the same since then. So in just a few months, it will have been 4 years of me not raising my rate. And just based on inflation alone, I would now need to charge $220 an hour just to earn the same amount that I was earning in 2020, back when I was charging $185 an hour. I mean, I'm still charging $185 an hour, but hopefully you're tracking. In my extremely part-time practice, where I'm only seeing therapy clients 1 day a week, that difference in amount would still add up to $10,000 per year. And keep in mind that $10,000 isn't a pay raise that I could have had. That $10,000 is just enough to earn the same income that I was earning back in 2020, because inflation is tricky like that. So if you're not raising your rate, then that means you're giving yourself a pay cut every single year. I mean, I've seen so many therapists make a decision to just add more therapy slots on their calendar instead of raising their rates. And yeah, that's another way to get at the same income point, but it just doesn't make sense. Like, in what other career would we say, rather than you getting a pay raise to reflect inflation, you just need to work more hours at the same pay? I mean, it just doesn't hold up. And all that I just said doesn't even account for the reality that our expenses are increasing at a rate that tends to be faster than the rate of inflation. So for example, back in 2017, when I first signed my very first lease for a full-time therapy office, my rent at the time was $600 a month. And now fast forward to 2023, my current full-time therapy office costs $1,350 per month. That's more than double in, 6 years? 6 years. Now, granted, the office that I'm in right now is a bit nicer than the one that I signed a lease for in 2017, but not more than twice as nice. So if you haven't picked up on it yet, the solution to not getting paid enough is to raise your rate. Obviously, if you have a cash pay practice, you raise your rate. If you have an insurance-based practice, you can ask for a raise. I have seen this happen to so many folks where they're still getting the same insurance reimbursement years in. And again, inflation, we covered that. So please go contact your insurance and ask for an appropriate pay raise as well. Another reason why I see a lot of folks feel really unhappy, even in their full practice, is that they're drowning in the admin stuff. And sometimes we don't totally foresee just how much time we might spend on admin until we really get into it, because maybe when you were working at an agency or a different setting with an employer, the employer might have had other systems in place that accounted for some of those admin items, and now in a solo practice, you're taking them on. You also don't have somebody kind of like checking on you to make sure you're hitting deadlines on things like your progress notes and all of that, so it's easy for things to slide. You know, things like billing insurance or following up on scheduling calls or taking care of your bookkeeping or keeping up with your progress notes can be really difficult to keep up with, and sometimes they take much longer than we realized when we first got into it. So the solution here is to, one, feel validated knowing that there's a lot of stuff that we end up working on aside from like sitting down and seeing our therapy clients when we're in private practice, and either finding a way to streamline those things that are taking up too much space and bogging you down on the admin side of things, or it's also an option to hire out for those things. Now, hiring things out costs money, but again, you got to make sure you're charging enough to cover all the appropriate expenses of private practice. And if it helps you to hire something out that you're otherwise procrastinating on or just feeling completely bogged down by, then that might offer you enough energy to see more clients or just enjoy the practice that you have. Now, if the issue is that you're getting totally backed up in your progress notes and that's weighing on you, you obviously can't like hire somebody to help you write your progress notes for you. But if that's the case for you, I recommend you check out Maelisa McCaffrey's work on YouTube, where she talks all about taking notes and all kinds of tools to kind of help streamline that process. So feel free to check out her stuff. The next common reason why I see that people seem unhappy in their practice is they wind up feeling really isolated. I mean, I can empathize with how this plays out. You know, you're probably leaving some employment setting that you're just ready to get out of and transition into private practice, to get out of all the bureaucracy and whatever mess has come in the places you worked before, and to finally work for yourself, do it your own way, etc., only to find that, you know, weeks, months, years in, you've just kind of like been doing this whole thing by yourself. Now, the easy to say on paper but hard to implement in real life solution to this is to find your people. Find people, find consult groups, find friends who are therapists, talk to them, be a human being. But it can be incredibly difficult to find those people. I kind of see it a little bit like dating, where there's a good chance that most therapists out there are probably not like your inner circle type of people. And this isn't a bash saying that most therapists are bad. It's just, you just like dating, to say not everyone out there is going to be your match. You kind of have to look through a lot of people before you feel like, oh, I found someone who gets me. So if you can have that mindset when you look for a support system from other therapists, maybe that could help you to say, okay, I had coffee with this person and I chatted with that other person. I just wasn't quite feeling it. To say, you know what, that's all part of the process. Let me keep giving it a go until I find people that I really connect with. And they're out there, I assure you. I've met some of you. You're so nice. Thank you. Even though I also relate that sometimes I have to meet a lot of therapists before I feel like I found someone that I really connect with. I have some videos about how to find support systems, consult groups, avoid isolation, all of that, so I'll make sure I link to those below. Another reason why I see therapists unhappy in their practice is they're not working with their ideal clients. There can be this lingering kind of message in our field that we're supposed to try to help everyone. And I agree, as a field, as a whole, we should help everyone. But that can't all fall on each of us individually. We each have our own unique role within this field, so there's going to be people that I jive really well with as my ideal clients that you really don't, and there's going to be people who you jive so well with as your ideal clients that really I don't, and that's a good thing, in my opinion. I noticed that a lot of folks can feel uncomfortable advertising towards their ideal clients because that imposter syndrome can start to pop in. Like, oh yeah, if it were up to me, I'd really love to work with folks dealing with this, but I don't know, am I really qualified? Is that really okay for me to put that on my website? Etc., etc. And you know, it's a worthwhile question to ask. Are you really qualified to serve the folks that you wanting to work with? If the answer is somehow either no or like I'd like to be a little more qualified, go, by all means, go for it. Find your ideal clients and make sure you're educated and qualified to serve them, but market to them, talk to them, and invite those folks to contact you in your marketing materials. I know for me personally, if my caseload is full, or even if it's a season where I kind of put a couple of more spots in my schedule just to accommodate more folks, but they're all my ideal clients, I love my job so much. It feels so fulfilling. It feels intrinsically motivating. I feel so curious about the lives and the needs of those who are in my niche that it really doesn't feel like work to me to say, okay, I am gonna go research this thing on the side, maybe at night after I've seen my clients, because there's something that came up with one of my ideal clients that is a little new to me. So I'm going to look into it. I'm going to dig and be curious. But if it's someone in the category that is outside of my ideal clients, then it really feels like a slog for me to try to learn more about what their needs are. And that ends up being energy that I give towards that instead of the folks that I'm working with that I already have energy for otherwise. So hopefully I've made a case that, it's okay to have a specialty and advertise it and market your services to those folks so that your work is more enjoyable. And the sixth reason why I see so many folks not enjoying their private practice is we're caught in the pressure to serve others first and neglect ourselves. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard the metaphor of like putting your own oxygen mask on before helping somebody else. Like, obviously, we have to understand mentally that if we give ourselves to everyone else and then we just give ourselves whatever crumbs are left behind, it's not sustainable. And not only do we end up paying for it, but then our clients pay for it too, because we're not able to show up as our full selves to our sessions because we've just exhausted all of our energy. So it's so important to care for ourselves first so that not only are we okay, but we are so much better equipped to then help other people. Now, I know I've talked about this in other videos, but I'm gonna bring it up again because it feels so important to change about our culture. This is like, bonus info for those of you listening to the podcast. But we have this cultural value that's still here today in 2023 that somehow as therapists, we need to pay our dues, quote unquote, early in our career so that we can eventually work to a work-life balance and pay scale and all of that kind of fits us well. And none of this makes any sense to me. How does that make any sense at all? I'm aware that the way things are currently set up, we are relying on folks who are trainees and very early in their careers to care for those folks who otherwise might not be able to access therapy because it's too expensive. And I don't think the solution to this problem is to put the burden on interns just because we think it's okay to pay them less or whatever. Personally, the cultural shift I would advocate for is that in the earlier years of our training, that we would have just extra hand-holding, an extra soft place to work. And as we get more proficient over time, we continue to increase our training so that we become more and more equipped to help more and more folks, people with higher and higher levels of need. And if we're speaking about the financial piece, there's so much information available out there in the world that if we can build our financial wealth early on, it's so much easier in the future. So if our higher level of pay can happen earlier in our career, then we might actually stand a chance to build a financial foundation where someday it may be accessible for us to offer pro bono work without it being financially sacrificial on our end, at least not to the same extent. I've spoken about this, that I've been fortunate enough to start to make that transition here. I'm in my 30s. I never thought I'd be able to start moving in that direction this early, and that's all because of private practice skills and all of that. But even if we considered, me being in private practice in my early years, I could maybe work in private practice for 15, maybe 20 years, charging a very reasonable rate, buying a house, having kids, if that's what I choose to do, or spending money on whatever life's things that we end up spending money on in kind of the first half of our lives, then I'd have enough money to invest, build a foundation. I've already locked in maybe a mortgage rate so I'm not priced out of an area. I already have a 401k going since my 20s, and little by little, I could build my financial wealth so that maybe by the time I'm 45, 50, 55, I don't necessarily need to work as much to have the same lifestyle. And I could instead give my time away or charge less for my time and financially be completely stable. So I know that was a really long rant, but I feel quite passionately about this, that there are solutions where we can offer very well-equipped care, pro bono care when necessary, without taxing our clinicians and setting up our interns for success. It just requires an extremely radical restructuring of how we do things. So, I can't personally do that by myself, but anyone who's listening, if you have power to make change, I hope you heard me. So if somehow you're in a position where you feel like you've taken on this mindset that you kind of need to help everyone else first and as many people as possible first before taking care of yourself, then I encourage you to find ways to access a different narrative. Maybe it's that you need to surround yourself with people who can help advocate for you to take care of yourself. And also, I trust that if you're able to make that shift, you'll start to be able to collect your own data points for, when I take care of myself first, I'm actually so much more effective at helping other people. I could probably even help more people too. All right, we're just so backwards in our mindset here. It's not your fault, it's the whole system. So excuse my feelings. Now, of course, this isn't a fully exhaustive list of all the reasons why somebody might be unhappy in their full private practice. I feel like I say that caveat with every video where I have a list of things. But these are some of the common explanations that I end up seeing in my circles. And of course, I didn't mention this as a bullet point on the list because this is an outcome of some of these issues, but any of these issues or all of them in combination can definitely contribute to burnout. And obviously, if you're burned out or starting to burn out in your role, you're not going to be happy in your job. So if you're finding that for whatever reason you're feeling dissatisfied or you're striving or you're struggling, something about your therapy practice isn't working for you, even if your caseload is full, I really encourage you to take a look at some of the things on this list. Consult with some folks who you trust to see where things might be going off kilter and addressing them so that hopefully you can avoid burnout and also you can just have a fulfilling, happy life. I think everyone benefits if you're able to have a practice that makes you happy. Whew, I did get a little heated in that one. I feel so passionately about this topic. If you're feeling unhappy in your practice, I hope this video offered you some encouragement, maybe some nuggets of wisdom to kind of guide you for whatever might help you in your next steps. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.